Right. Good afternoon again, everyone. I think you need to applaud yourselves for your patience. Thank you for giving us a little bit of grace time. It's that time on a Friday afternoon in Port of Spain when traffic is, well, I don't need to tell you what traffic is like. I'm going to vacate this podium very quickly because you didn't come to hear me speak. But I'm happy to welcome you to this afternoon's Big Ideas panel. Those of you who are regular attendees of the Bocas Lit Fest know that in addition to all of the wonderful fiction and poetry and memoir and spoken word and everything else that we include in our program, we've always had this series of discussion events which tackle some of the biggest, the hottest, and the most difficult topics of the day. And the topic this afternoon is basically Caribbean regionalism, Caribbean unity, what it looks like now, what it could turn into. It's not a topic we had to think very hard about putting in the program because it's flinging itself at us off the newspaper front pages every day, as you all know. It's a timely conversation, but also a timeless one because this question of, how the Caribbean works at an institutional level, an interpersonal level in terms of identity, politics, economics, culture, philosophy, that's something that each generation has to kind of negotiate and litigate for its own purposes. I'm going to hand you over very shortly to our host this afternoon, our host and moderator. That's Jarrel De Matas sitting at the far end. Jarrel is an academic, a newspaper columnist, writes a column for the Trinidad Express. Did a couple of events with us earlier today in our youth program around artificial intelligence. You will be in good hands with him, and I will let him introduce the other three people on the panel. However, I do want to beg your indulgence for about 3 minutes before we begin, because I want to read you a poem. Don't worry, I didn't write it. This is actually a poem by Derek Walcott, and I want to read it because I want to kind of make the point that conversations like this do belong in a literary festival because our literary writers think about these issues and have done for a very long time. So it's a short excerpt from Derek Walcott's poem, The Star Apple Kingdom. It was published nearly 50 years ago, and it's a poem that is inspired by the kind of political and social conditions in Jamaica in the 70s under the Manley government. And I like it because I think in a lot of ways it reminds us that everything we're going to talk about this afternoon, we were talking about back then, and that our literary writers have always been, in some ways, the harshest critics at the same time as being the most enthusiastic proponents of Caribbean regionalism. So here it is, a little bit from the Star Apple Kingdom. One morning, the Caribbean was cut up by 7 prime ministers who bought the sea in bolts. 1,000 miles of aquamarine with lace trimmings, 1 million yards of lime-colored silk, 1 mile of violet, leagues of cerulean satin, who sold it at a markup to the conglomerates, the same conglomerates who had rented the water spouts for 99 years in exchange for 50 ships, who retailed it in turn to the ministers with only one bank account, who then resold it in ads for the Caribbean economic community, till everyone owned a little piece of the sea, from which some made saris, some made bandanas. The rest was offered on trays to white cruise ships, taller than the post office. Then the dogfights began in the cabinets as to who had first sold the archipelago for this chain store of islands. We've got more than 7 prime ministers now in the Caribbean. We've got a few more than that, but I think Walcott's very trenchant and mordant take on maybe what happens behind the closed doors of heads of government meetings could very well be echoed by many Caribbean writers and thinkers and ordinary citizens today. So having given you a little bit of poetry, just because we're in a literary festival, let's get into the meat of the conversation. Please welcome our speakers, and I hand over to Jarrel.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicholas, for that setting the scene with Derek Walcott and our literary writers who, as you say, have always been on the cusp of what it means to be Caribbean. And I'm excited to have this conversation with all of you today because, as Nicholas mentioned, it is very present. I told Nicholas the panel sort of wrote itself when we think about what is happening right now. And I was just talking to my mother, and we were talking about Black Stallions' Caribbean Unity song. And I want to read the first few lines as a way of also setting the scene. You try with a federation. The whole thing end in confusion. Caricom and then Carifta. But somehow I smelling disaster. Mr. West Indian politician, I mean you went to big institution. And how come you can't unite 7 million? With that, I want to jump straight into it. I have Richard Lynch to my left, Nirad Tewarie, and Sunity Maharaj. We're jumping straight into it. What does the Caribbean mean when we hear the word? What does the Caribbean mean to you? Richard.
Well, the Caribbean means complexity. The Caribbean means, certainly to me, colonial legacy. It means plantation society. Caribbean means certainly complex migration. And to me, the Caribbean means a uniquely long struggle for self-governance. And I think that somewhere wrapped up in those four strands of our history is the political, economic, and social collective, or perhaps even individual, attempts to arrive at a Caribbean idea and an ideology that we could all see our unique strands of history contained within. And so maybe I'll start there for me as far as what I see the Caribbean as. Yeah.
Nirad, what do you think about that word, the idea? Because an idea suggests that it could be ideal, but it's something that is unfinished. So, I don't know, Nirad, what comes to mind?
So, well, I think two things. You had asked us to come up with 3 or 4 words, so I tried to do that. I'll come to that. But I think we need to start by defining what we mean by the Caribbean. Because there are definitions of the Caribbean, but the Caribbean, to me, means a series of concentric circles, right? And for us from Trinidad and Tobago, it starts with the English-speaking Caribbean, and then it goes outward. So whether we include even Haiti to some extent, but certainly Cuba and the DR, do we include all of the countries that are touched by the Caribbean Sea, a la the ACS? What about the overseas territories and how do they fit? So we have to define what we mean by the Caribbean so that we're talking about the same thing. And it could be many things at the same time in different contexts, right? The economic context, political, philosophical, right? And so we have to define that. But to me, definitely Richard's word, complexity, absolute beauty, and inchoate. I had to look that one up, so I'm not trying to be super smart, but an idea that is yet to be finished, right? And so we are a project, we are a people that are still developing, and I'm sure during the conversation we'll have time to expand.
Yeah, Sunity, what about you? What comes to mind?
Home. Nothing else but home. I could go home now. I mean, I don't know how to elaborate. Home means so much. It means belonging. It means responsibility for. It is home.
Now, okay, but what if home means something different to everyone?
Okay. I'm fine with that. I mean, it means home for me. What seems to be different for everyone is the idea of the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. But I think home means the same thing for everybody. This is your place. But this is mine. You want me to elaborate? Yeah, is that it? Okay, so I am, I guess, genetically Indian, culturally as well, but I am fundamentally culturally Caribbean. So I do recognize the indigenous as my ancestors too. A long line of people who were here, because culturally they have shaped the place, they are my ancestors too. My ancestors are not only in India. So all of those are the things, and what people have met here and what they have done with it has created something. And for me, that's the Caribbean.
Now, for any of you, where do you see that cultural shift perhaps happening? Or has it happened to the extent where the definitions of the Caribbean remain in flux? Because culturally, we are losing a sense of what it means to be Caribbean. So, Sunity, maybe someone would say, well, Caribbean is not home to me. And so...
And I would say, okay, I can't force somebody to call the Caribbean home. I think it's all right. And what we are trying to do here is to say, what does the Caribbean mean to me? Right? And I think that it's fine. And if somebody doesn't feel that this is home, I can't force them. They are on their own journey. I think that is what we need to have, the space for everyone to be who they are in a place. And we are not the only part of the world that is in flux. You know, just yesterday, Iran had a whole set of historic architecture and cultural spaces that connected them to their rich history. Today, they don't have it. Does that mean the generation that is born, the child who's born today, has lost that and no longer feels what the parent felt with the memory of, you know, having lived with something else? I think that is part of life. And we are, the unique thing about us is how we came together. This group, this population of people, there was a population before, and there was a very sudden rupture. It's a collision of Europe and the Americas. It was as sharp as it possibly can be. It was one thing today and something else tomorrow. And then people were lumped together, not even considered humans. And then other people left and then said, well, see for yourself. Figure out who you are and what you could do in this place now. We have to go. There's been a world war. We have to go and fix our capitals, and we have to, we've been bombed out and so on. We really can't deal with all of this. Sort out yourself. And I think we're trying to sort out ourselves.
You mentioned rupture, and I saw Richard nodding when you said that. And I wanted to ask you, any of you, about how historians perceive events as happening in cycles. And with that understanding of rupture that you mentioned, the original rupture with first contact, let's say, do you see cycles of rupture happening right now on some level? And what does that say about our definitions of the Caribbean that we seem to hold?
Well, I think part of contextualizing these cycles of rupture, as Sunity was sharing there, my mind went back to a rupture that took place in Trinidad, in particular, and I think is a microcosm of what, to some extent, what the Caribbean has been about. In 1797, a general arrived here, Abercrombie. Interestingly, we're on, to some extent, Abercrombie Street. We could discuss that. That's an entire discussion by itself. This was owned by the Spanish, this island in particular. And with one attack, the Spanish gave up the island to the British. Now, what did that mean? That intervention presented a situation where you had a new British government, British-style government, that inherited Spanish laws, a Spanish legislative framework. And what has happened since then? We've seen the arrival of indentured laborers, Indian indentured labor, Chinese, Indian. The Portuguese arrived. We had a relatively short period of transatlantic slave labor, African slave labor. We had Africans who arrived here who were never slaves, enslaved. We had indigenous peoples, and we had all kinds of arrivals here that ruptured what was home for the people who were here before. And the process of working through what does this new home look like on the basis of cycles of rupture requires that we identify with a collective set of values that are important for us to be able to at least coexist in some kind of a way. We all came from families, all right? And you don't always get along with your family members. In fact, you don't get to choose them a lot, all right, unless you're a parent, producing children. But there is some sense of a collective sense of values that hold us together, if not necessarily the same ancestral experience. And those values, I think, are an important framework within which we have to begin or to continue to defend or define if we want to be able to shape the kind of Caribbean that we want in the context of what is happening today. All right? So I just wanted to put that on the discussionary table because I think it's important to be able to interpret these cycles of rupture or ruption that is taking place as we go through this experience that is called Caribbean.
Nirad, do you see the same way in terms of values that need to be defined or redefined? How would you see that?
Well, I think we're always defining and redefining our values. I mean, any country in the world, you see the shifts and you see historical cycles. We sometimes forget that if we look at historical cycles, it's really rinse and repeat, right? So you see extreme liberalism, and now you're seeing extreme populism and conservatism, and it goes around and around and around. These aren't new things, but the project that is the Caribbean is still ongoing. We talk about the Caribbean, and all of our scholars have spoken about the Caribbean as a project defined, of course, by colonialism and shaped by resistance. Last time we were on a panel together, Sunity got upset when I said, I don't like that we define the Caribbean by resistance and revolt. The resistance, yes, but I think it's resistance, adaptation, and creation, not revolt all the time, although revolt is sometimes necessary. And so, if you look at that as what has shaped our thinking, our identity, you still have colonial territories in the Caribbean now. We have a live movement of anti-colonialism in the BVI right now. The political directorate in the BVI, the indigenous political directorate in the BVI, is pushing for independence today. The Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed in 1973, and the OECS became independent between 78 and 82. So the Treaty of Chaguaramas was signed in the middle of the creation of Caribbean society as it is today. And in there we had the Cold War, and we had the heyday of the Bretton Woods institutions, which we are seeing changing. And so we have to adapt. And we have to define what we are and who we are in that space, and it is going to affect us, especially as cultural consumption is changing. A big part of how we were defined and how we took North American culture and so on was because we had limited media options. And now, between creation and consumption patterns, all of that is changing. And what does it mean, even as our Caribbean institutions and the things that would naturally bring us together and create movement of people in the Caribbean? Do you know that Caribbean history at CSEC stops at 1985? Now, everybody has to do Caribbean studies at Cape, but I went and looked at the syllabus because I wanted to see. I did history a little while ago, right? But it stops at 1985. Now, I hope the teachers would introduce contemporary issues as they teach, but the syllabus ends at 1985. So we are we are creating the society. So what are those cultural values? They are changing, right? But there are some things that make us, the Caribbean as a place where people meet and can be. The Caribbean as a warm and loving place. The Caribbean as a place where community matters. Yes, the crime statistics, I see you not, the crime statistics don't necessarily bear that out, but for me, my experience is the Caribbean is a warm and loving place, and that's how I see it. There are risks, like there are everywhere, but I think that is who we are as a people. That is part of what we are as a people. And so I think, we are going through another period of evolution as a society, as a Caribbean society.
That connects to something Sunity said, related to belonging. And I wanted to ask, Sunity, how do you see that process of adaptation? Because if we accept that things change, people change, cultures change, cultures have to adapt. Do you see it the same way? And what does that adaptation look like for us, for Caribbean people?
Well, I don't agree with adaptation. No, I wouldn't frame it in those terms. Because adapting to what? We are still in an act of creation. And we have the challenge. We have the challenge of the primary challenge of having inherited this space and this place. We want to sound like the THA chief sec, everything is a space. And not having been equipped for it, because the education system was not an education system designed to create leaders. It was an education system for clerks. A few people will get jobs, a very few people, and you want to have them, go along with whatever the program is. The political system, we still don't know what to do with it. How do you get representation? You vote, and your options between now and then is, if you don't like something, you protest, but people are learning that protest changes nothing. So they wait until, when we get close to what looks like 5 years, and then they start the bargaining. But you cannot move a government. Well, I'm not dealing with force. You cannot move a government by having a majority that does not support the government when the government is in office, because we are a top-down society. We are very much a crown colony society with concentration of power at the top. So those are all the challenges we have, the economy.
But that's any democracy. That's any democracy.
That is not true.
In any democracy, you have cycles of popularity of the leadership.
You can move the British Prime Minister, and this one might very well be moved very quickly, because the party life is there. What we have members of parties who represent the leader. It's supposed to be the leaders represent the people. So the leader says we're going here, and everybody's following. We're going. And the very next day, the leader says we're going so. Tomorrow, they could all love Caricom if the leader says Caricom is the greatest thing and we are a zone of peace. And they will all say who was saying yesterday, it's a zone of war. It really is a zone of peace, True. Right? With the mental gymnastics, it deserves serious study. There's no doubt. Work has gone on. People like Professor Hickling in Jamaica did a lot of work in understanding the psychiatric condition of a traumatized population. People don't accept it, but we are traumatized people, and you would be if you come out of the history that we have. And ultimately, self-knowledge, we have to invest so much more. This is why our artists are so important in trying to understand, who am I? The fundamental question, who am I? Identity, right? Because otherwise you are like, blowing in the wind. You could be, and exactly what happens, you could be anything, anytime, any day, anyhow in this country.
Yeah.
Right? You could be, that's why Jack Warner is the defining personality. And he could say yesterday was yesterday, and today is today, without a blink, and it's okay, today is today. Forget yesterday. No, it is. These are the qualities of a people who have come out of arbitrary power. the power at the top is arbitrary enough. People remember, what election was it, 51? And we didn't have the political parties that we have. It was a lot of independents. But the group that was assembled by Butler won the election. And there was no way the governor was going to give it to Butler. He gave it to, what's his name? The Portuguese leader. Yes. Gomes, right, Albert Gomes. Right, so Albert Gomes became, because no way they're going to give this renegade, because the governor could actually legally make that decision. That is the pure crown colony, and what we have today is that concentration of power at the top. And we know, we live it every day, that, I mean, Williams expressed it, not a damn dog bark. And today, we hear the highest quality I admire is loyalty. That is the same thing.
I want to bring in Richard here because you've advised on matters of national security and that idea of the zone of peace, zone of war. I want to know where you stand, because there seems to be some good disagreement between Nirad and Sunity on the role of democracy, and I want to know where Richard stands on that, particularly as it relates to security, but certainly your own opinions on that.
Yeah, well, democracy is a set of ideas and ideals that we pursue. One of them is the sense that the people who are representing us. But part of that process is to be able to define who we are and what we want. Unfortunately, as Sunity would have pointed out, our politics does not seem to be the vehicle, historically or otherwise, by which a collective set of values and principles is representative in our political process, right? And this idea of the zone of peace is no different. I mean, if we consider the period in which this idea of us being a zone of peace was established, it was actually a response to exactly what we are contending with today, and that is the idealistic contention as to whether we are somebody's backyard or we are satellites of none. These are two competing concepts of who we are in the region. The broader question is, who do we say we are? And how are we representing that in these two geopolitical interpretations of what the place and space is all about? Given our history, which is clearly part of this perpetuation of extra definition being imposed upon us. My concern is, what is the process by which we are self-defining to the extent that we can effectively say this is not who we are, but more importantly, this is who we are, right? So part of the narrative is, well, okay, in the absence of war, do we inherently have peace? And how do we define peace if, in the absence of war, there's this interpretation that the trafficking of guns, drugs in these communities is having the same impact or similar impact as if we were in an all-out military war, right? I think that's a legitimate discussion, if not debate. But does that mean that those who should act upon the interpretation that there are new and emerging threats that are as impacting negatively upon our sense of peace, at least at the community levels in these islands, should be led by extra-regional forces that are defining it for us, right? Yeah. And that's, to me, an important part of our discussion. It is not anti-anybody else. It is a question of, is the integrity of our discussion among us as to who we are, what is the impact of these new and emerging threats, and how do we treat with it, even if it means we decide how we're going to contextualize those who want to come and assist us with these new and emerging threats. Yeah.
Nirad, you want to say something about the process of self-defining? Because Richard, you said politics is not the vehicle of representation. So then what is? Not the only vehicles. Nirad,
I mean, look, I think even as we continue to, I mean, and Darwinism is that we sort of bring it down to survival of the fittest, but the fittest are the most adaptable. So I maintain that we are still adapting, and we always will have to adapt, because no entity, no person, no state will be able to define itself by itself without taking into consideration what is happening externally, right? So these are things that we absolutely must take into account, and we must also be pragmatic in some of the things that we do. I mean, we talk about the Caribbean and unity. There are 3 countries in the Caricom who recognize Taiwan and not China, right? I mean, I don't know how this will land with this particular audience, but we in the Caribbean, in the Caricom, practice extreme schizophrenia in our foreign policy, right? So we would allow a Commonwealth Secretary General to be elected in the name of the Caribbean who was a cabinet minister of Great Britain. And we support it. We propose it, as in the Caribbean, right? But then we come and say Caribbean sovereignty. But we do not practice that in reality. And so there is a level of pragmatism. In the 1990 coup, there was a plane coming here from Libya, and if it weren't for the support of the Americans, that plane would have landed in Piaco. Was that intervention, or was that in our self-interest? And so I like how Richard framed it. We have to have the discussion. It's not that we want to be a satellite of any or to be operating in anyone's backyard, but there are great powers who see the value. You see, the greatest value of the Caribbean to the international community is our collective number of votes in international fora. And so the great powers, or those who are seeking to be great power, increase their power in the international community, will always court the Caribbean. And the same Jack Warner understood that. And that's how he became boss of CONCACAF, right? He leveraged our votes and the Central American votes and got an ally in the US. And all of a sudden, you had a massive block of votes in FIFA that everybody had to court. And so we can leverage those things by all means, but it means we have to know what we want, and individually, each country has to know what they want in that context, because there will be a jockeying. There's the CDB, there's the Caricom, there's this post, when the ACP Secretary General comes up, and so on and so forth. These are realpolitik, the give and take of the international relations that we want to practice to get what we want. Because your foreign policy should simply be an extension of your domestic policy in furtherance of your national interests. Now, your national interests don't have to be short-term. Don't get me wrong. It does not have to be transactional for today. In fact, you are often better off thinking on a longer horizon. But it cannot be that you just do one thing today. It cannot be that you behave like Sunity described some local politicians behaving in your foreign policy.
It feels like the national interest is different from the regional interest, and so how do you reconcile that in this moment?
No, it's not different it's not different at all. I think it's very much aligned. Listen, when Andrew Holness became Prime Minister, so Andrew Holness and I were in a forum of regional people the year before he became Prime Minister. And at that point, he was an extremely skeptical person when it came to Caricom. So one of the first things that he did is he set up the commission to review Caricom, the Jamaican commission headed by Bruce Golding. And they presented a report, And on the basis of that, he did some things and he didn't do some things. So the idea that Caricom, the institution, and subordinate institutions is and are not working is not new. There is anybody who would stand up here honestly and tell me they are happy with the functioning of Caricom, I would say, okay, I have no discussion to have, I good. Because it doesn't make sense. It is not working. So it needs to be reformed. And that is in the community's interest, if you can have reform. But will the politicians devolve any power? And that is the question. So the institutions will never work if the institution itself is designed to be powerless, right? And we have a great example of that. Dax would remember this. I don't know if anybody here was involved in trade policy, but when we were negotiating the economic partnership agreement with the EU, which is still our largest and broadest trade agreement as a bloc, the Caricom had the Caribbean Regional Negotiating Machinery as an institution of the Caricom to negotiate. And they did a fantastic job under Richard Bernal. And they were quasi-independent or allowed to be. And they negotiated and got this agreement done. It is still a very good agreement for the region. Service providers, musicians, artists, graphic designers can go into the EU and work for up to 90 days a year, visa-free and without any requirement for a work permit under that agreement. Right? It's a very good agreement. And what happened after? The politicians thought that they got too powerful and disbanded the RNM. And they brought it underneath, and eventually it just disintegrated. So that's a live example of what happened. So what we need going forward are institutions at work. Lloyd Best spoke about the need for Caribbean independent intellectual thought and capacity. We need that. Where is that? Where is the research that is being done that will speak truth to power backed by facts on a regular basis? So how do we have a discussion in the absence of facts and data and information? Because emotions will always come into it. But how do we add or make sure that at some point there are facts and there are details? So in Trinidad and Tobago's interest, Trinidad and Tobago has always seen the value of Caribbean institutions. And if Trinidad and Tobago is doing well, Trinidad and Tobago will continue to support Caribbean institutions. So if we do get petroleum resources from Venezuela, for example, that's in the Caribbean's interest. Right? We are a market. We send goods, yes, but we are a market. People come here from the Southern Caribbean for healthcare, for different opportunities. So any country in the Caribbean that's doing well is good for the Caribbean. Now, what you mean is what I assume you mean is our close relationship with the US at this point in time undermining and further fracturing Caribbean unity? It is a difficult moment. It is a difficult moment where we have things to resolve. But also, I tell you, this is part of the reason I say our foreign policy as a region is schizophrenic. How could a Caribbean leader receive a foreign leader in the midst of a dispute over territory where that foreign leader bold-facedly displays their claim on a sister Caricom country, 2/3 of that country, where all of the rulings thus far, even though it is going through the judicial process, all of the rulings thus far are in support of the territorial integrity of our sister Caribbean country. That is foreign relations 101. Your people are supposed to do that, meaning the foreign service officers are supposed to ensure that you never end up in the room, far less in a picture with someone doing that. You could back channel, but that should never happen publicly.
Yeah, but, okay, so Nirad, that a gap that exists then with trying to...
I've spoken too much. Ask somebody else.
No, I want to go to Richard because, I mean, if there's a gap with how international relations, regional relationships are being managed or mismanaged, shouldn't there be someone already knowing that? Like, this is a contentious issue to begin with, so why does it even happen?
Well, I see foreign policy design a little different in Iran. I think that countries pursue different types of bilateral and multilateral relationships based on a clear sense of what is their interest. I am of the view that, okay, let me give a classic example. The US and China is clearly in a major battle for control of the global economy. But they are the largest trading partners between them in the world. You can agree to work together in some areas and disagree vehemently in other areas. The question is, what is the diplomatic framework that allows you to optimize areas that you agree on and ensure that you represent your interests on areas that you disagree on, right? Especially for small, vulnerable, open economies like ours that cannot afford to unilaterally and in all spheres of foreign policy take a singular approach. It's self-defeating. And I think there's a dichotomy here that we need to treat with. The initial discussions around the complexity of the region and our member states in the region suggests that there are some indigenous and unique structures of vulnerability that demands a sophistication of our foreign policy to treat with understanding and identifying multi-alignments, right? We are past the era, I think, of the post-colonial era of non-alignment. Non-alignment towards multi-alignment based on your diplomatic strategy, I think, is in our best interest. And I think as we begin to delve deeply into what are the structural vulnerabilities and advantages based on our unique history, there's a whole range of foreign policy options that can and will be available to us if we pursue them.
Unique history and future potential, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Sunity, you're involved with the Lloyd Best Institute, so where do you see that diplomatic framework helping us with that sophistication? Do you see it as Richard does, with needing a sophisticated diplomatic framework that we don't currently have? What's your view on that?
I think the problem is not framework, it is clarity of interest. It is a clarity of interest. You have to first know what is your interest.
So what's those interests?
What?
Yeah, what are the interests? What should be some of our interests?
This is a conversation that the society has to have. And Nirad, you keep making my point. When you say that we can go out there, we go out there and support a position, and at home we're not doing the same thing. But that is because you have to distinguish between the government of Trinidad and Tobago carrying a position forward and the people of Trinidad and Tobago having a different position. But the government always talks about, as you know, I'm speaking for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But there is no conversation to inform that position, right? So just because the government has done that doesn't mean that we are schizoid. We know what we believe, but nobody asked anybody. And that is the failure and the shortcoming of the political system. There is not, the representation does not exist. People are representing whatever gets them, you know, the opportunity. And if tomorrow, that's why people jump from one party to the other seamlessly, no problem, no problem. And it's not only today. So I don't think it's about framework. I don't think it's about legalese. All integration movements, they come together for a reason, but all of them allow the other to be the other. France the other day went to the Security Council and voted against any kind of whatever it is to force to the Strait of Hormuz. The rest, the other European members, UK, voted for it. So, and that is, well, they're not part of the EU, but Spain, right? So that you negotiate. You know, in the case of Caricom, people are jumping up and saying, "What is Caricom doing for us? Look, what are they not? They're not securing the sea. That's not Caricom's job. It is our job." So we have not even had the basic conversations about our own interest. How do you connect? How do you build a society that is informed? And we come right back to the education system. We do not even know this place. And I'm not talking about the simplistic thing of the people who don't know from the lighthouse, which exists and is true. It is true. But a society has to have some shared understanding of the place. There are things you share, you must know. And then you could say, well, we share this, but in certain so and so, I have a different perspective, and that is democracy at work, right? And you engage people and so on. We haven't even begun the task of approaching that, because it is. I think we must be in some kind of tail end of an approach, of an idea of a political system that we can evolve out of the fragments of our history. Because we certainly went straight to the British way, a form of it, you can't even say it's Westminster, a variant. But we have run that course, I think, as far as it is likely to go. The danger is the vacuum. I'm particularly worried about right now. I think the vacuum has developed too early. And we usually can see the vacuum like in the third to fourth year, and it's okay, well, elections come around the corner. When it happens this early, as it happened with the NER, that release of an election coming is not there. And what happens is that other forces could enter the space. So we have to be alert, and we have to understand, I think. I'm just putting that out there because I feel people should not expend all their efforts on criticizing, condemning, and so on. Really try to understand what it is you're seeing and how do you fill that vacuum. You fill it by representing yourself and getting your communities together. If the political parties are not doing that, encourage community. I am so shocked at how everybody's silent and just talking, namby-pamby stuff, including all the chambers, right? All the people who could afford to speak truth to power, they are in retreat because of opportunity. So there is the kinds of conversations where we are talking about the framework of Caricom and the framework. I think all of those things are irrelevant. If Caricom disappeared tomorrow, I don't know what we would lose. I don't think Caricom is integration. I think integration is the people who know the country. I think Higglers and Hucksters are the ones who are integrating the region, the ones who come to sell their provisions and so on. They certainly know all the currency, they know the public holidays, they speak the languages and so on. Then they have friends and they have families, all over the place. So, but other than that, what do we lose? I know that is a explosive kind of question, but topic. But Caricom it has gone through so many iterations of review. Time for Action by the Sonny Rampal was a very expensive operation. They went from country to country and talked to everybody. In Trinidad, they came upon the coup, so I could forgive them for that. But what did it amount to? A massive talking. So I think that, I think we are way late in a conversation that sets the foundation for a society in which you can say, okay, these are the things we agree on, and this is what makes us Caribbean. This is what makes me Trinidadian or Trinbagonian. Yes, those are the things we agree on. What other parts we can pursue? Let's talk about that. We might not agree. And that informs the policy position that governments and so on take, but they have to take it from the people.
Now, I do want to get the audience ready to ask you own questions to the panelists. But Richard, that point about we are late, we're already late playing catch up, right? Were we even in the race? When did we start, and why are we late to it, and what gets us to that catch up moment?
No, I think that there's, maybe I'm a bit too optimistic, I don't know, but institutions have an important role to play in governance in any society or any region. And institutions, from time to time, are in need of reform. That's part of the formula of development in and of itself. I agree that there are aspects of Caricom and its institutions that should have been, taken a hard look at long before this. Because let's face it, I mean, it kind of worked once there wasn't a major dissenting view by a major contributor, financial contributor that is. But it wasn't designed for when there is dissent, right? Trinidad and Tobago contributes roughly 22% of Caricom institutions' annual budget. In a previous incarnation, I was part of the coordination of that. But there are several other smaller economies that 10 years passed and they didn't make any contribution. Their allocation. Now, part of the challenge is the formula that GDP per capita that was worked out to determine every member state's financial contributions towards Caricom Institute organs was designed for a different stage of member states' economy. You have to take another look at some of the economies that have done extremely well since that formula was applied, institutionalized, and some that have not, and try and determine, those who are doing better should contribute more. And security in the region is a major sphere of that challenge, right? You have to decide what you are going to pay for, not just what you are vocal about what you want. And many times some of the member states that are the least contributing are the most vocal. But the general society would not know that, right? And that level of accountability should delve all the way down. It should be an experience that we should all have. We should hold our governments accountable for what they are prepared to contribute towards our regional reality, but that comes from a regional sense of who we are, even though we are living in member states, right? Because I am not one of those who believe, based on the transnationality of the trafficking of guns and drugs and people in this part of the world, that you can achieve an acceptable level of peace and security in any of the member states in CARICOM without a robust regional security architecture that helps us to treat with our vulnerabilities from source countries in Latin America and consumer markets in the global north, right? So it has to be local, it has to be community, but it also has to be regional. Because, and the institutions have to reinforce each other in that context.
No, I'll come to the audience. I just want to go off of Nirad, that point about accountability, because Sunity and Richard are both touching on that need for accountability. Where do you stand on that? Because it seems to me like an ideal to demand accountability from our politicians.
I mean, it's always an ideal, right? Because in that power corrupts, right? So there are very few examples of where it doesn't, but accountability is absolutely critical. So let's go back. So Richard said that Trinidad and Tobago contributes approximately 22% to regional institutions. And we saw that in numbers when the Minister of Foreign Affairs would have gone to Parliament and put those numbers out there. Didn't it alarm you all that 22% of CARICOM's budget is $5 million a year? What can you get done in the region if your budget is $25 million? Sorry, math is not my strong. Right? Pardon? You know, so I mean, these are the critical things. But when you talk about, look, to be able to engage in the kind of foreign policy that Richard is talking about and that we want, that is a pragmatic foreign policy that takes into account our national interests, where we are able to work with partners on the things that we want and stay away from the things that we don't want, to a great extent, because it will never be absolute. We also need to be in a position of relative strength and not be vulnerable. And so when you talk about accountability, because there is a link, if our countries are all highly indebted and are in need of funds just to get basic things done, such as paying salaries, because the debt service is so high, the amount that you have to pay from your budget just in servicing debt. And that is a cycle that we cannot break, bearing in mind that part of it is malgovernance, but a big part of it is linked to geographic vulnerability, right? So the data is there that shows after a big weather event, debt increases all over, right? And so we are now, when I talk about adaptability and creating this project, the Caribbean Disaster Fund, where Jamaica just got a huge payout after the last hurricane, because they had invested in insurance for that reason. And we are now sort of learning and designing financial models that mitigate. They don't solve, they mitigate. We are now designing financial instruments that are linked to, Guyana did it with the RED initiative a long time ago, and Barbados is doing it with the blue-green bonds and the like, where they are able to access the capital markets based on things that they are doing to preserve the environment, right, or to have a positive net environmental impact. So these are things that we are learning. But if the money that we are getting is misused, used badly, or stolen, then it is not actually going to reduce vulnerability, because it will not be used for any production and any resilient infrastructure. So I think Jamaica is going to, in the next 5 to 10 years, if they continue on this trajectory, is going to start playing a very different role in the Caribbean now and in Caricom, because their debt to GDP ratio is falling, both because GDP is expanding and because they are bringing debt down. And they have created institutions within Jamaica that allow for collaboration, right? So you have the EPOC, which is the private sector and the government and civil society monitoring their commitments to the IMF program and reporting on it. And that is a big part of the reason that they are seeing success across administrations, because remember, this IMF program was negotiated by the PNP and is now being implemented by the JLP, right? So we need accountability to increase our resilience, if nothing else. Of course, it's a great ideal. All of us who believe in honesty would like to see accountability. It is a moral responsibility, if you like, but it is a practical step toward increasing resilience and reducing vulnerability.
Let's go to the audience. Yes, sir. You have a question?
Yeah, don't you don't mind?
Yes.
Yeah, for the live stream. Thanks.
Hi, yeah, I like the idea that philosophically and culturally we're all connected. But I think politically, political utopia within Caricom is a little bit, to put it politely, naive. I mean, federation failed because of power imbalances in the Caribbean between Trinidad and Jamaica. And those still exist. And this is partially kind of what is going on right now. Oil-rich Trinidad is less, other countries with different alignments to geopolitical powers. And that's the really big one. So we are now effectively colonized by the geopolitics of our area. We were affected with Russia-US geopolitics with Cuba, and now we are affected by China, US politics, where effectively, since Trump, the core thing has been to get China out of the Caribbean, South America, Central America. And that is actually what is, if you look at everything, that is what is driving our area. And when Rowley and Mia Motley went to the Senate meeting, and Mia said to the committee, you know, if you hold us to ransom with banking, we will start talking about BRICS, you know, for our moving our economy, sort of becoming BRICS friendly. So, you know, we're held to ransom with our finances. Banking is nearly impossible, you know, internationally, or very difficult. So are we still colonized by the new geopolitics of the world? And are we doomed to forever squabble like children amongst ourselves?
I mean, what do you think about that? The new colonialism, because it comes back to the historical debate and cycles. So what do you all think about that?
I think we choose it. We are choosing it all the time. Richard said something, not in this panel, but some time ago, that I found to be striking. In dealing with a crime situation, he made the point that we are constantly trying to increase resources, more policemen, more cars, whatever. When if we invested in regional security, that is in the border control, and invest in the fleet and whatever, you can block that. The guns that are coming in and the drugs that are coming in that create the conditions, you could replace some of that money. You can shift that funds in that. But we have never invested in anything outside the island, because the Royal Navy used to do that. They used to be patrolling the seas. Now it is Southcom. It has never occurred to us that we need that defense. And we have to choose, for the money that we have, how do we spend it? And if you look at the institutions, the reason that we can have a Caricom budget of 20-something million US is we pay for nothing. Every institution that there is funded by some European. I suppose that's part of the reparations in a form, you know. Some Europe. In other words, we don't want it badly enough, but if somebody's giving us the money, we'll take it. And we certainly took it for the CCJ building in Trinidad, because we're not in it.
And Caricom headquarters.
Right? The Dutch, I think, Netherlands put the money for the CCJ. So, and I come back to, we have not even the project for independence, which is you are now an independent people. What do you need to move forward? We have never had that conversation as a people. We need a particular understanding, given all the way we came here and our differences. What are the common things, right? I really shouldn't belabor this point, because this is the time for the floor to speak.
Yeah, we had other questions. Yes, sir.
Good evening.
Yes.
Okay. I am Eric Esdell. And Chair, when you started the session, I was amused when you spoke about the question of Caribbean development. Because one of the reasons that development eludes us in the Caribbean, true development, is because a few leaders and persons of influence has 2020 vision. If we had a few of them who were blind, we would have been further along. That is why today the CCJ can find home only in a few ports, and it is absent in others. And when Mr. Tewarie spoke about the whole question about someone displaying something and it causing a brouhaha, I wonder if he reflected on the opposite. If it is that those persons who did the display said, listen, I am not coming to talk to you or trade with you because I understood that you are friends with so-and-so, and that is a problem for me. In my view, if that person chooses to display and advocate for what they have been advocating for all the time, that's their right. And if it is that the other person says, well, this is mine, And I would advocate for that's their right also. But the position of the Caribbean community is that this is a matter that is before the ICJ and it will be settled there. I don't see the need for the brouhaha. No, I listened to Richard speaking about those who contribute less have stronger voices, as though your voice is supposed to be subdued if you only put a penny. And I had a problem with that. I listened to Sunity a while ago. Two things about it, what she said, about how we can speak wider in the Caribbean and all of that. But there's one fundamental point that she forgot. Our institutions are broken. Corruption is rife all over. And the reason why all the drug trade and everything flourished is because we have corrupt officials all over. So until we clean that up, fix our institutions, can't get anywhere. And lastly, Sunity, you spoke about the absence of the voices. Well, you were the only one who I saw join me when I was speaking about the possibility of being olive green jacked. That's the fear right now. Many persons don't want to speak because they don't want to be olive green jacked. So I leave you with that. Thank you very much for listening.
Who wants to take that one?
No, look, everybody's entitled to their opinion, right? And just because I say it doesn't mean I'm right, and just because somebody else says it doesn't mean it's right. I made a point about statecraft and Caribbean unity, and I stand by that, right? So I'm not going to go back and repeat it, but I absolutely stand by that. If you look at any Caricom communique, since I've been reading them, so at least 20 years, it ends with reaffirmation of Caricom's position. Caricom's position, and it reaffirms its stance of the territorial integrity of Guyana and Belize. That's how they end, in almost everyone. To Suniti's point about patrolling the waters and stuff, this is why I think we need data. The majority of the guns, I can't speak for the drugs because I don't have the data, but the majority of the guns that come into Trinidad and Tobago come in through legal ports. So unless we have that accountability throughout government, and I don't mean the elected government, I mean the people who work in government as well, the public servants who facilitate the security, the minority, but enough of the security services who facilitate. The people in the banking system, the minority, who facilitate. We are not going to achieve our full potential as it relates to development. And because we are small, because we are open, because we are vulnerable, and because we have to contend every day with these very real influences and changes in the international community, if we don't fix inside, we will always be more vulnerable to outside. And we will always be weaker as we engage in the practice of statecraft. And that would lead some people to question whether we are still in a colonial situation or not. I say we are not. I say we are maybe not as strong as we are. We would like to be, but we are not. And if we continue to develop and define our national interests and how we can project those national interests through statecraft, through our international relations, and in collaboration with our Caribbean neighbors and the Caricom, because we will be stronger in projecting our national interests in foreign or in multilateral institutions. If we can coordinate, then we can be in a different position next year and year after and after that.
Richard.
Yeah, so I agree. I agree with Nirad and goodly gentleman here about this question of accountability. There are a lot of international donors. Sunity mentioned one of them, European Development Fund, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative. There are a number of extra-regional partners, and I'm using the word very clearly, partners, who fund a lot of the regional security architecture, and I would imagine investment architecture in this part of the world as well. And that's important. And it's important because the structure of insecurity in the Caribbean is a global structure based on the use of raw materials in the global south to serve consumer markets in the global north. And we are stuck in the middle there, right? So there is a role for international partners to play in the funding of the strengthening of our institutions to be able to police the community, the region, to provide us with stronger maritime domain and so on. But I also agree, and perhaps this falls along the line of what Sunity has been talking about. If the structure of the economy is designed to facilitate beneficiaries of transnational organized crime, then what is the mechanism by which the institutions of accountability will hold them accountable? And that's a structural issue.
You need to repeat.
Right?
You need to repeat that. I don't know if that landed.
Right?
Because that's an important point.
And so that is a colonial legacy. That in itself is a colonial legacy. Because the structure of the economy offers a particular type of vulnerability. Let me give an example. Human trafficking in this country is based on persons from the continental states. But who's paying for the services of the trafficked persons? Right? Who's paying for it? There's a market that is based on the structure of the economy in which those who have the capacity to pay for the services renders the trafficking of young girls into this country lucrative. So unless you deal with de-incentivizing that demand, supply will always be there. So it's a structural issue, right? And like any other economy or any other industry, there are upstream and downstream investments. So corrupt officials in customs or police and so on, you have to design a plan or a framework that respects the fact that there is a structural driver of why insecurity exists in these islands here and how do we address it from a business model. It's important.
And add the dimension that some of these organized crime syndicates have indirect but very close link to states.
Well, not states alone. Say it for what it is. We're not interested in campaign finance reform and other measures that are critical to treat with the structure of the economy itself.
I think we could have time for one question, and then I'll come back to the panelists to wrap up.
Hi.
Yep.
Hi, thank you for all of you for your contributions this afternoon. So, Richard, you spoke to one of the questions I had for the panel this afternoon. What are the mechanisms that we even have for accountability? Not just businesses, but I mean regular citizens. Do we protest? That really work? Do we sign a petition? Who's reading the petition? Does it have meetings? Do I meet my counselor? Do I just go in the office and sit down and just wait? What are the ways in which we actually get the people in power to listen to us in meaningful ways and not just the year before a general election, right? And what are the models within our region of democratic representation, what's working right now. Are there any examples of that?
Very quickly, we're wrapping up. Richard.
Listen, all of the above.
That's a diplomatic answer.
And some. Part of this process is an internal journey, I think, the sense of which we all understand our own platform and our own empowerment, right? There's someone in this room who once asked me, Richard, how do you occur? And I asked him, what do you mean by that? And he said, how do you understand you come across? And the conversation went on because what he was getting at is, do you understand your own audience? Do you understand who do you attract and who are you attracted to as far as what you think your life's work is all about? And I think that's a question we all have to answer, because part of the journey of being able to hold our institutions accountable is our own sense of how do we occur, how do we come across, what are our convictions, and what are the platforms we are building to be able to have a voice for what we are committed to in this space. I think that's very, very important, because if we understand it through those lenses, we are all political. We're not party political, but we are all committed to expressing a set of ideas and values and principles that we think are important to the governance of this space that we all share. And the society is crying out for that. The region is crying out for it. A deep sense of who we are and the expression of us individually to create a whole that is more than the sum of its parts.
Now, as we wrap up, I want to wrap up where we sort of started with the theme, which is, what does the future of the Caribbean look like? So I asked you at the start, what does the Caribbean mean to you when you hear the word? And I want to end with, what does the future of the Caribbean look like to you? Sunity mentioned the vacuum, but you want to take us to the end.
Well, I think the future depends on us. It's not preordained that this is going to happen. That the more we shut down our personal power as individuals and do not take responsibility for the place, then we leave the space open. And all these problems, nobody could disagree with accountability, but why do you not have accountability? Because all the institutions that we inherited, we have done nothing but it got to the point where it's run down. We have not made them fit for purpose, which is, what is the purpose we want out of this? We haven't done that with education, we haven't done that with health, we haven't done that with government. We haven't. So I come back to the challenge of independence. Are you independent as an individual? And are you empowered? Everything around us is serving to disempower us, and we accept the disempowerment in exchange. I'm giving up my power for a transactional relationship. And as long as this is there, I will get. But when it goes, I get nothing. So I better grab as much as I can. And that is your choice. You have made that choice. So it's very hard. I can hardly blame politicians. They are representative, maybe. Because look at us. We're the people with the 2 and 3 degrees. Those are the ones who are most silent. The people who are the ones making noise, they're on the streets. We send them out, go and make noise, burn the tires and so on, but they're getting smart. They wait, they say, no, I have to get an envelope now. That's not working. So we have to face up as a people. After so many years, and Richard, I can't end without correcting you on your first point about no enslaved person, right? Because, of course, the people who came with the French in 1783 were all enslaved. And slavery did not end until 1838, right? So that's just we will be embarrassed by if we said that's not true. It is true. By the end of the slave trade, you had a lot of people who were, the British brought from Sierra Leone and so on, and they came as free. as free persons, but that's a correction. Yeah, so we have not come to terms with what independence means. We are looking for the government, but in the same way we expected Massa to do it for us. We just have better clothes and we have cars and property, and so that's the transaction we are making. And we're giving up our power and our right and abdicating our responsibility for this place. Nobody's going to do it if you're not doing it.
Nirad.
Yeah, I mean, so like Sunity, I agree, the future is not preordained, right? And it is largely up to us, individually and collectively. I love to speak to young people and quote, I think, I forget who the author of the quote is, but it's, never believe that a small group of people can't change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has, right? So we have to do what we can do. What I would say is there are realities, and we have to choose what we're willing to compromise and what we're not willing to compromise in everything we do in life. And there should be fundamental things that we are not willing to compromise. And once we get to that point, then we have to fight and try and make those things more rather than less in our life, right? More things that we're not willing to compromise on rather than fewer. But for me, the Caribbean's potential, right, is very much there. What will happen? I don't know. Will Guyana use its windfall to transform its economy, or will they do what we did over the many years and fall into the same trap because their debt continues to rise even as they go through this period of inflows as they try to develop the infrastructure in the country? So these are things that we have to watch and see, but I would like to think, from what I see, the capacity that we have in the islands, but in the diaspora, and the exposure and the knowledge, the connections, I think that this is a great time to be Caribbean, and there are many, many opportunities. Just one, for example, the Middle East, the Emirates, were the hub of the growth of data centers for the big companies that wanted to have multiple geographic locations. They are going to need a place to relocate. What about the Southern Caribbean with our potentially now abundant energy? For example, that's one. And on the topic of accountability, I mean, both Sunity and I were former journalists, me less than her.
I'm not a former journalist.
Well, I am a former journalist, right? But, I mean, there's a treasure trove. What's that, sorry? There's a treasure trove of information. Somebody is doing the pre-work now for you. If you want to know where to look as a journalist to do stories on accountability, just go and look at whatever is being stopped and reviewed by the OPR and start there. They've done the work for you. People have objected. People are reviewing, see which ones are successful. Anyway, let me stop before I get myself in trouble. But there are tools for greater accountability, and that's why we also, one of the things that everyone in this room can do is continue to advocate or start advocating for the National Statistical Institute. Basic, non-controversial, but we need data. We don't have the CSO operational fully. That act was repealed, and we have the NSI Act, National Statistical Institute Act. We need to have data. So, I mean, something as simple as that can help with accountability.
Absolutely agree. And Richard, take us home.
Yes, just to hopefully clarify, what I was referring to is the small band of Africans who, after the abolition of the slave trade, there were attempts to bring them across. They were indeed abducted from Western Africa. Right. And some of them were brought here who didn't experience, no, not all. So let me just clarify. So there were Africans that arrived here that did not experience plantation slavery here in this part of the world. But as far as the Caribbean is concerned, I think I agree with both of my colleagues. There are opportunities for us to be able to shape our own sense of destiny in terms of who we are. But we have to leverage all of our power, intellectual, cultural. There's a lot that is happening, and I think it's important for us to do that, we have to begin to transform the way we see ourselves and how we see ourselves as agents of the expression of the experience and exposure and expertise that we all carry, because this is Caribbean. The expression, the free expression of who we are. This is Caribbean, right? The question is, what do we do with the Caribbean experience that we are having here as we go back in our spheres of influence, right? Last year when I was here, I was making the point. I come from a very different world. I don't come from the world of the creative arts. I come from governance and public policy making. But I understood the limitations of the political culture and climate, and I wanted more. And so I stepped out of the space to try and understand how other sectors are addressing the same problems that the people who we put in a particular space want to address. And I was committed enough to the process to expose myself to how other people are seeing the same space, right? And I'm richer for the experience. And that's the kind of collective commitment I think is important for us to move the Caribbean along. I'm a military professional, right? Strategy is big for me. What appears to be chaotic and is in fact chaotic in terms of the geopolitics of the world also creates opportunities. And if you're small and adaptable and multi-skilled enough, you can optimize the vulnerabilities, the opportunities that presents itself in the uncertainty of the world that we are living in. So we are small, but we are not insignificant.
And with that, I think that's a good way to end. I want to thank my colleagues again for this discussion. I want to thank Bocas Lit Fest for having it. And please continue to support the program as we move forward. Nicholas?
Everyone, please just give a big round of applause. I like the phrase you just used, Richard, free expression of who we are. That's what we're doing for the entire weekend at the festival, because that's what our writers have always done, whether they're writing novels or stories or poems. That is, in fact, the entire point of having a festival like the Bocas Lit Fest. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your perspectives and your expertise with us. This is clearly not a conversation that wraps up in 90 minutes. This is a conversation that we will be having for as long as there's a Caribbean civilization. But we're happy to have been able to host this little fragment of it here. So I just need to tell you 3 things. Number 1, the festival is not over. We're going for the whole weekend. We've got 2 more days here at the National Library and Old Fire Stations. If you did not know that, please get a festival guide and program on your way out, and we'd love to see you Saturday and Sunday. We've got a very packed program for the next few days, almost all of it free, including all of the events here in the fire station. That's the first thing. The second thing is we are not even done for today. We are done here at the Old Fire Station, but we're all going to move on shortly to the Big Black Box in Woodbrook, home of Three Canal, where we've got a wonderful evening event. It's actually a festival fundraiser. It's the second in our Kaiso Conversation series, and the 3 members of Three Canal will be talking about the art of writing lyrics for Rapso and their long career, their 30-year career in the free expression of who they are and who we are. The last thing I want to say is, I don't think it's any secret that, like many other arts organizations in Trinidad and Tobago, we are fighting an uphill battle to keep going. We're determined to keep this festival going. If you enjoyed this discussion, if you enjoyed other events you've been to today, if you would like the Bocas Lit Fest to continue the work it's doing, there is a donation box at the back of the room, and you can slip your spare cash into it. single dollars, $5, $100, write us a check. But this is a great way for you to just show some tangible support for not just the festival, but for all of the writers, the speakers, everyone who's part of the program. So everyone, thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you over the next couple of days.